Hi everyone, and welcome to today's monologue. And today we are back to sort of my home ground, which is conservation, and it's in reference to something we've been discussing on X, the X platform. I've been putting forward a few times, sort of telling the general public, giving them translations of what I refer to as conservation bullshit. Um, these are just paradigms that are baseless but are used so commonly in conservation that they become normalized. Um, Now, someone suggested that some of these things would benefit from verbal discussion or verbal translation of what they are. So the first one I'm going to start with is a very dangerous and harmful term, but used everywhere in conservation, and that is this thing called communities or community. And this is why it's deliberately harmful. Community is a term used in conservation to eliminate the individual, to eliminate the individual, his aspirations or her aspirations, his needs or her needs, his most importantly, his or her opinions, and lump them together. And this is why community is only used in conservation to refer to black people. The white, the many millions or hundreds of thousands of white people who live in Africa, work in Africa, are never referred to as communities. This is because they are individuals, acknowledged as individuals, seen as having opinions, personalities, aspirations, intellect, etc. All these individual attributes that conservation refuses to attribute to black people in Africa. So you end up with like things like community conservancies, community based conservation, community owned lodge. The community gave their land for conservation. The community agreed that they would not be grazing on this place. The community decided that they wanted us to build for them a school. There's no individual. And this is not a new thing. Um, those who've heard me speak have often seen me present a slide where there's a whole bunch of about 10 different names of conservation heroes from Africa, or heroes of African conservation, and they're all white. And my question based on this slide is, does this mean conservation is racist, or does it mean that black people do not care anything about conservation? Even in this day and age, with probably thousands and thousands of black people who have worked in conservation for years, many who have advanced degrees in conservation, still you do not find any conservation heroes or icons who are black people other than those who are serving the interests of who are who are competently serving white interests. And by that I mean like rangers, uniformed staff, wardens, these people who are basically props in the whole movie that is conservation. Where does this come from? It's a prejudice that comes from an extraordinarily successful myth that managed to tap into the romantic prejudices of Westerners in Africa. And that's the myth of Tarzan. Um, a lot of people take this lightly and laugh, but Tarzan is an extremely powerful allegory, if you can call it that. And that's why it was so successful. It's a cheesy story by any standards. If you just look at the story, it is some some noble white man finds himself in the middle of the African jungle, speaking with apes, no black people anywhere in sight, but interacting so deeply with the apes and getting to know his way around the jungle with a level of expertise even swinging around the trees with a level of expertise that rivals that of the monkeys. No black people. Eventually, some white woman appears from somewhere, called Jane, and some funny story like that. But when black people finally appear in Tarzan, in one of the many later iterations of the story, they appear as interlopers. They are criminals. They are nasty people. They are thugs, and they are not. As the story goes, they are not supposed to be there. They are a problem. This is exactly what modern conservation, contemporary conservation, picked their narrative from. And if you look at Tarzan, first published by Edgar Rice Burroughs in 1912, that long ago. But those were very heady days. Theodore Roosevelt had just finished his bloodlust safari to Africa, Kenya, as it were, and being feted as still being feted as a hero for his exploits during his African safari. And then Edgar Rice Burroughs publishes this, what would seem a very unlikely tale, but it fit in very well with the aspirations of the and self-actualization needs of the elite at the time in America. And it picked up. Tarzan's still big to this day. Disney is still producing various iterations of Tarzan, even in contemporary times. So the thing is, as much as it was a work of fiction, we cannot underestimate its importance in what has happened since then and what continues to happen now. That's why black people are referred to as communities. There's no individual brain, individual opinions or aspirations need. They emphasize this community, the community from this place or this particular. Sometimes they're referred to by the place, sometimes by ethnicity, etc. And this handle is used to exploit relentlessly, because when they say community, they come when the conservation practitioners refer to a certain group of people as the community, they eliminate the individual names, the individual families, individual needs, etc. Then they come and tell the community, we want to help you. Now, the first thing before we help you, we need you to choose a leader. And this is to create, to make the local population, to divide them into quanta that can easily be manipulated, exploited, um, bullied, and otherwise objectified as far as the needs of the practitioner. So this is the reasoning behind the community conservancy. So suddenly, instead of needing to talk to 10,000 people and find out what Mordecai, so all these other people need or want, or finding out their opinions, suddenly you've reduced this 10,000 people and individuals and opinions and needs into a group of 6 or 7, and you call them leaders. Then this group of 6 or 7 can be manipulated by simple financial handouts. They are given jobs. They are called chairman, secretary, or etc. etc. They are taken on junkets abroad. Some they are celebrated in reports, etc. And these kind of things. And for that, in return for that, they sign off rights, privileges, opinions, and all sorts of they sign off the entire franchise of these people, and they have the legal authority to do so. So this group of people suddenly can now sign a 30-year agreement leasing this particular land to a carbon trading organization, and they can lease it at a fee of $2 per hectare per year. And that's not a cooked up figure. This is actually the content of leases that have been signed by Soils for the Future in southern Kenya, the carbon trading leases. These are actual figures. So you know very well this is corruption. It can't be that's not money that can do anything for anyone. So there must be other payouts other than what's on the lease fee. But the thing is, we've created a legal platform from which huge people, huge numbers of people from huge areas of land can be disenfranchised from their resource rights and their birthright by the stroke of a pen of 5 or 6 people. That's why they call us communities. So it's important for those of us who read or consume conservation literature, conservation media, and these kind of things. The word community, if you see community, you see prejudice. And if you didn't know it before, you know it now. Those who work with the organizations that do all these community projects, the community conservancies, etc., that is the truth. Either you're either prejudiced or you're ignorant of that prejudice. Those who are ignorant now are hopefully from this now you know. You're working to disenfranchise a whole bunch of people. It takes time. You can still do the same project, but go around talking to people, find out everyone's opinion, etc. It will take a long time. But time is one of the things you have to invest, and that's one of the things conservationists don't want to invest, because they always create the crisis narrative. We don't have time. The elephants are disappearing, and rich Mr. X has given $5 million and he wants feedback on his grant within 1 year. So the easiest thing, organize people into community something or the other, bribe the leaders, disenfranchise the rest, and life goes on. And that has become the norm. It's a form of prejudice, a form of oppression, a form of corruption that has become normalized and is actually financed by people who, I guess we have to assume, are well-meaning. And that's what conservation does to us. It romanticizes things, and it keeps trying to get us to depart from reality in order to achieve certain romantic aims. I mean, the conservation of wildlife is not a romantic aim, but the removal of people from land to make room for wildlife is a romantic aim. It's something from the Out of Africa movie, 1986, or the story of Karen Blixen. It's something from Tarzan, where there's wildlife, there's wild landscapes, there's nice, beautiful forests, and there's a white man. But black people are not there. And black people, when they do appear, are a problem. And we have now this paradigm whereby if black people appear, they are either meant to be working for the white man's agenda, or they should get out. And this absurdity has become normalized. I mean, I've seen short clips about Jane Goodall's biography, the documentary about her life and career, and she says she was inspired by Tarzan. That's how far down the road we are. That has become so normal that no one at all, even the producers or Jane herself, saw the absurdity of being inspired by something so dystopian as Tarzan. But that's why we need to keep reminding ourselves of this. Um, there 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 are absurdities that are constantly normalized in our world, especially around environment and conservation, that are normalized by the number of people saying it, the number of people working for or around it, the number of people giving money towards it, and the sheer amounts of money that they're giving. So when you see the word community, it refers to someone who has no agency of his own. It refers to someone who they feel has no agency of his own, cannot think for himself or herself, is subservient to the noble, either the noble who has come or the noble who has been created by those who came. That is what the word community in the conservation context refers to. It is it is it is a diminution of the individual, and something that a sort of it's a habit of an attitude that has no place in the modern civilized world. So you cannot have you cannot have decisions made on our behalf, especially if you think about it, a decision made on your behalf by someone you didn't elect. We have systems of government, like we have members of parliament who are supposedly in parliament speaking for me as a constituent. But when you have a scientist financed by a capitalist, and then that person financed by a capitalist comes and usurps your agency for the betterment of himself and his capitalist master, that is that is dystopian. That's something like from the dark ages. It has no place in the world today. And I know some people are wondering what does what about the wildlife we are talking about. Wildlife is important, but today we need to understand that wildlife is a double-edged sword. It's important, but it's important as part of our heritage, but it's a tool by which we can be oppressed, some even get killed, and we can be displaced. Wildlife is the most, especially the rhino. I can mention the rhino because World Rhino Day was a few days ago. The rhino is the most powerful land grabbing tool in Africa today. And I feel free to quote me on that. I've repeated it several times. Where there's people who live close to rhinos in Africa are people who do not know peace. And if you look at the extrajudicial killings in the course by conservation interests, I can show you the rhino habitat that's close to there. Whether you go to Kenya, South Africa, Eastern Southern Africa, it's the rhino is has moved due to this due to this sort of conservation dystopian conservation thinking. The rhino has moved from being a beautiful part of our heritage to becoming the most powerful tool of our oppression. Elephant to a lesser extent, other endangered species, lions, etc. These the wild animals do have we do have conflicts occasionally with wild animals, but they are nowhere near as dangerous as the people who hang around our ancestral lands claiming to protect these animals. So that's the first chapter on conservation bullshit. Community. When you hear the word community, hold your nose because there's a stink of prejudice around there.